welcome to the video. So, you've read the title, you know this is asking, is the jab necessary? Now, I should preference that this isn't a video saying that the jab is bad by any means. That would be a stupid video. The jab obviously works, it's obviously a good tool. This is just proposing the question, is it really necessary to know, especially once we understand what a jab is and understand some of the strategies people used before we use the jab, like in early pugilism and traditional martial arts. So with that said, let's get into asking what exactly is a jab. Part one is what exactly, again, is a jab? Well, essentially, a jab is just a lead arm weapon. It's also a defensive weapon. A lot of martial arts will kind of liken this kind of lead arm to a shield, and the rear arm or the rear hand to a sword or a spear. And that's kind of a good way of looking at the jab. It's your shield. It's a defensive weapon. Use it obviously to strike, but using it also to, kind of feel out your opponent, gauge distance, using it to set up power shots, using it to keep an opponent at a distance, especially if you make them respect your jab, things like that. And that's basically it. Not a whole lot to the jab. But yeah, that's essentially what a jab is when you break it down. So now that we have a brief understanding of what the jab is, we gotta ask, what did we use before the jab? That brings us to part two. What did we use before the jab? And well, we just used an open palm. You see this all the time in long guards, traditional martial arts, old school boxing, Muay Thai. This kind of stance is very common. And the strategies used in that are really similar to what we see with the jab today. It's using to kind of feel out the opponent. You can throw palm strikes. You can throw them pretty fast too. And we're talking about like hitting to the head, bare knuckle. It's a bit safer. Hitting the body is fine. Throwing a punch to the body. But when hitting to a hard surface like the head, palm strike's gonna work a little bit better, or at least a little bit safer for your hands. You can also gauge you can also gauge distance like you would with the jab. Some things you can kind of do is frame off your opponent. This can help kind of maintain that distance. It can also help control your opponent, and it can help you set up bigger punches, bigger strikes. Something Jack Johnson used to do a lot was he would frame off an opponent's head, exposing their chin, and then coming back up with an uppercut, and that would usually knock out a lot of people he was fighting. Other things you can do with this kind of strategy is you can trap, you can grab, kind of pull in to set other things up. And yeah, that's basically it. And yeah, those are some strategies that you can do with an open palm. And you can still see some of those things today with like Muay Thai, and you can see them sometimes in MMA as well. So if an open palm worked just fine, why exactly did we switch over to a jab? Well, there's two main reasons, or at least I feel there's two main reasons why. Boxing was a huge influence on how we kind of go about a lot of striking, especially with our hands. What we do up top, and the stand-up, again, was very influenced by boxing. But boxing changed quite a bit in the early 1900s, especially like first of all, gloves started becoming a bigger thing. Gloves came about in like the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, sometime around there, over in England, but they didn't gain prominence in the US until like the 1890s or the early 1900s. And that kind of changed how we approached throwing punches to some degree, because there was less of an issue with fucking up your hands, because you have these wraps on, you have this glove on, your hands are basically clubs now. So you can kind of get away with throwing punches a bit more willy-nilly. Not to say modern boxers, throw their punches without any kind of sense of accuracy. But because your hands were a bit more vulnerable prior to gloves, you'd really want to wrestle with your opponent, set up these shots, and hit where you know you're not gonna fuck up your hand as much. So that was one reason why something like a jab became popular, because that danger kind of went away. And the second reason, which is the bigger reason in my opinion, is well, they took away wrestling. You couldn't fight in the clinch anymore in boxing. You couldn't do all these things where you're controlling your opponent and setting up shots that way. And the long guard became a bit more inefficient because this works a lot better if you were allowed to clinch up with your opponent, if you're allowed to fight in the clinch with your opponent, and also throw things like palm strikes and frame up and use these kind of wrestling techniques. A lot of that stuff became illegal in boxing. I mean, you still saw boxers utilizing these things. Archie Moore utilized it, and George Foreman utilized it quite a bit. But you also saw the flaws in that as well, especially when we see like George Foreman fight when he came back from retirement. You saw some of the limitations. People were able to get in and throw these hooks on him, and that wouldn't really happen if you had clinch fighting in boxing still. So wrestling changed up how a lot of people, or getting rid of wrestling changed up how a lot of people went about striking, because now it was just purely focused on striking. And your strategy changes a lot when you're only focusing on a very specialized aspect of combat. So that's why I feel like things like this kind of went away. But yeah, that's the video. Nothing too long, nothing super in depth. I'd like to go deeper with some of these ideas or kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. A little bit hard when I don't really have a sparring partner. I just kind of have my wall here. They don't do too much. They just kind of hold my roof. So they're busy with that. But yeah, that's the video. Do you guys agree? Do you guys disagree? Let me know in the comments. Let's start some kind of discussion. I hope this video kind of helped you out if you are kind of interested in some old school boxing and in traditional martial arts, and maybe me talking about some of the strategies they employed back in the past with this kind of guard, and with the kind of lead arm strategies that they used. Hopefully that helped you out a bit. Hopefully that gave you some ideas that you can, go off on. But yeah, if you liked the video, leave me a like. If you disliked the video, well, there's no dislike bar anymore, but I guess just type dislike in the comments. If you thought there was anything cohesive or smart about any of my ramblings, subscribe, share the video, all that good jazz. Anyways, I'll see you later, and keep on training. See ya.